The rise of the invisible Reich. Theories and evidence regarding the current state of Third Reich remnants in the 21st century and their influence on global geopolitics. By Hyperborean Research. Many of you are already aware that the Third Reich never officially surrendered during World War II, while Germany itself was and still is under the effective occupation of Zionist forces. It is well known that remnants of the Third Reich, including many of its top scientific and engineering personnel, evacuated Germany and fled to areas like South America, but also Antarctica. For long-time viewers of my content, you should already be well aware of the information surrounding Operation High Jump and similar operations. The strange flying saucer-like craft reported by Admiral Byrd were later seen above Washington just a few years later, and while the resulting UFO situation was later spun off into the more modern-day disinfo campaign, that is the modern UFO movement, few within the public domain accurately talk about the Third Reich origins of the unidentified flying object phenomenon.
1974, I read an article by Renato Vesco, just a short article in Argosy magazine, and it was saying that basically UFOs, flying saucers, don't come from outer space. They were built by the Germans during the Second World War. I know, this is Vesco speaking, because I was an engineer in Italy working with the Italians.
Despite the slew of evidence to support the German origins of the flying saucer phenomenon, it's interesting that the mainstream UFO narrative always seems to skirt around the Third Reich haunebu possibility. Instead, mainstream UFO circles always seem to prefer theories of little green men, greys, let alone the more delusional and outlandish theories that exist in the wackier end of this community.
1952 was one of the biggest years of UFO sightings in U.S. history. The culmination of that year was incredible sightings over the weekend of July 19th, 20th, and 26th, 27th.
Washington International was picking up UFO returns. People were reporting sightings of strange lights in the sky.
You've got these reports of these objects flying over the nation's capital.
A week later, the situation essentially repeats itself.
The press, having gone through this thing the week before, were better prepared, and they were down at the Washington International Airport asking what these things were that were being picked up by radar. We were getting the target returns on the ground. About 2 or 3 in the morning, we were still getting these returns.
Andrews Air Force Base scrambles 2 F-94 jet interceptors to investigate what was going on.
This time, one of the pilots reported that he did see a group of lights, and he flew towards them, and they appeared to be all around him. Then they moved off, according to the ground radar and his report.
Harry Truman made some phone calls to try to get some information on what was going on.
Government people coming out of their offices saw these objects, and you couldn't tell them that it hadn't happened.
The Air Force really had to say something, so they held the largest press conference since the end of the Second World War, run by the head of Air Force Intelligence, General Samford.
I'm here to discuss the so-called flying saucers.
General Samford and the rest of the Air Force brass believe that these lights were caused from temperature inversion.
And when that happens, that can cause anomalies in the radar. Radar signals can bounce and cause all kinds of mirages and illusions.
I can't think that that explains the lights that these pilots have reported.
The senior traffic controller, Harry Barnes, said, not a chance. We know through declassified literature, no one was really taking this weather explanation seriously.
Nobody thought that was true because the Air Force had been chasing those objects.
The Air Force baked it, the press served it, and the public ate it. That's really what happened.
With that said, many of us wonder what has happened to these Third Reich remnants. Germany has been an occupied nation since 1945, but legally, the Third Reich forces never actually surrendered to the Allies and Communists. In that sense, these surviving Third Reich elements are indeed the legitimate Germany, if you will. There is evidence to suppose that vast underground cavern complexes exist, and that in these areas, one can find an abundance of fish, geothermal heat vents, fresh water, as well as bioluminescent plant life that could, in principle, support small colonies of humans. A true subterranean ecosystem of luminescent fauna. If you just want to keep it at that, then it's unlikely any population could truly grow to a large scale living entirely underground like this. However, if we instead chose to believe that the Third Reich remnants discovered entrances into the Hollow Earth, as some U-boat maps seem to suggest, then it is indeed possible that the surviving Reich has been building a civilization otherwise unknown and invisible to the rest of humanity, with a new Berlin existing inside this planet of ours. If this is the case, then it's likely this quote-unquote invisible Reich could have a population of millions, with technology significantly more in advance to our own. Conversely, if the former situation of a limited Arctic base is the extent of it, where survivors live in a cavern complex and not in an inner Earth, then I'm not sure the population could reach more than tens of thousands at most. While we know about Operation High Jump, as well as the 1952 UFO display over Washington, D.C., most people don't know much about what has happened since. In 1958, the American government conducted Operation Argus, the only clandestine test series in the 17-year history of atmospheric testing. This operation consisted of launching 3 high-altitude nuclear devices. While classified, these test detonations were supposed to charge the atmosphere with radioactive isotopes, disrupting the Earth's magnetic field over the Arctic, which, in principle, could interfere with radar tracking, communications, and satellites. It's possible that this secret nuclear weapons test was some sort of attack to try and cripple the communications infrastructure of this invisible Reich. Besides this last event in 1958, not much is known about what happened next, or what this invisible Reich has been doing in the years and decades since. There's a lot of speculation, as well as a lot of misinfo, but what is true is that there have been a number of strange disappearances of high-level physicists, engineers, and other professionals with Germanic backgrounds. To explain this a bit more, I'm going to show you some edited clips of a top missing persons researcher in North America, who's been studying and coordinating these cases with military and police investigators for decades.
Now we're going to talk about percentage of the population, and it's been brought up many times by people, and that is, what percentage of the population is German? And I've stated at conferences that there's a very large percentage of our population that is German. And I understand that. But I want everyone to understand something clearly, is that every physicist I have ever documented that has disappeared is German. And I'm sorry, but there's physicists from probably every nationality in the world, in existence in the world, and I can't find another one that isn't German that's missing. I'm just laying the facts on you folks. Somebody brought up a question about indigenous women and how many are missing in Canada, and there's a lot. And there's a lot in the US as well. Harvey Pratt, Native American chief, 50 years in law enforcement, my best friends, we talked about this. Indigenous women missing is a problem of crime on the reservation and within the areas that they live. Many times there's not enough law enforcement, education, and social assistance for these people. And alcohol and drug abuse runs rampant. And on top of that, there's just a criminal element of predation that exists in that area. Every case I've looked at of a missing indigenous woman points to criminal activity, not what we're doing. Going back to the Germans that we talked about. So letter, hi David, I'm a newcomer to your work and have dived in wholeheartedly. Well done, and I admire what you do, as it's extremely important. I've just returned from a week assignment overseas and am getting caught up with your YouTube channel, your website, and your books. Below information may not be significant as unique events, but it does corroborate your work in a general sense. I'm a retired RCMP officer currently living in California. In the mid-1980s, I had occasion to be posted to RCMP headquarters in Ottawa. My choice of a career path, as with most jobs, had not yet taken place, and I was in the beginning of my career. I was assigned to a missing persons unit in the Arctic for about a year. I'm sure you know that working and living in harsh conditions, especially the Arctic, comes with a lot of risk, but these disappearances were odd. My assignment was to coordinate contacts with surviving relatives and advising them of their loss, dispose of their effects, and if possible, explain the circumstances of their disappearance. I was asked to go into this section because of my language skills. It seems that disappearing people, all men, were German hikers and/or tourists. Why be a tourist in the Arctic? During that year, I had a file containing at least 3 disappearances on Baffin Island and 1 on Ellesmere Island. I can't say if there were any non-German hikers that disappeared. That may require some checking, as I tasked only to deal with the German citizens in this letter. The time they went missing was in summer and late fall. I recollect that 4 missing men were totally alone and did not trek with partners or anyone else. The 3 on Baffin Island started as Inquinaut, Penguinic, and Pond Inlet. I'm sorry I do not have exact information, but I recollect that each had basic survival equipment and was decked out in modern, efficient clothing and had a trek plan that was submitted to local authorities. They also had 1-person tents, cooking equipment, knives, and food for a period of time. I don't recall if they had transponders. This was also before cell phones, but they were given a strict reporting schedule. No mention of satellite phones. Sat phone is something else that I carry besides what I've mentioned here. Back to the letter. There were eventually no computers in the RCMP at this time. Some were simply data collectors and information terminals, and it was still too technology early to map trends and perform any analysis like we can do today. The 4th person on Ellesmere Island was similarly prepared and monitored to the extent that was possible on that island. Search and rescue resources, especially during the 80s, were virtually non-existent in the winter. The men were of middle age, none older than 45, extremely well educated. At least one was an MD, a physician, and another had a PhD. Fit and athletic according to their relatives, dedicated outdoorsmen with substantial history of previous trekking in other parts of the world. None of the men knew each other, and they were from different parts of Germany. As you can guess, when they did not return to their designated places and times, searchers were mobilized. It appears that they advised their families back home of only a basic timeline, and that Canadian search and rescue techniques, minimal as they were, revealed nothing after an immense search. What did happen was that by the next year's summer thaw, for the 2 trekkers, sorry I can't remember the ones, they only found some equipment and clothing, no bodies. The total amount of equipment was far less than what they started out with. The same happened to the clothing. I seem to recall a shirt, a walking stick, a ripped portion of a tent, not much else. There was very little to be collected and sent back to their relatives. Unfortunately, my exact recollection regarding the men on Baffin Island is lost in time. I do not recall if the 3rd person on Baffin Island was found or not. The chap on Ellesmere completely disappeared, and some elements of his campsite was found. That island is so far north, I wonder why anyone would want to visit. Sorry for the lack of substantial details, but at the time I also found it odd that there were that many Germans going missing on these hikes and disappearing. Granted, it is not difficult to go missing in the wilderness, but why was it so coincidental? Looking into your work, I recall that a large portion of the people you reported missing were also well-educated, fit outdoorsmen from Germany. I hope this contributes. Fascinating letter. Now, folks, I want you to think about it. We're in this vast world we call Earth, and I'm talking about this little piece of it called United States. Here's something that's happening in Canada. And this RCMP officer was assigned to investigate these disappearances of missing people in the Arctic. I've written about cases in the Arctic in my books, and they are baffling. So, how did these German guys disappear? Why? And what were the circumstances? They don't even know. But I think this is validation that there's something to our research that is puzzling, because it even puzzled this professional. Australia and North America have facts associated with disappearances that are almost identical. Well, there you go. I'm going to present you things that are factual, that have justification for what I've written in my books. And I've just given you 2. Water, weather, Germans. There's some people out there that just cannot comprehend that this may possibly be true. And as we take this walk with my videos, I hope we can educate ourselves as to what's happening in the woods.
To fill you in a bit more on what this person was saying, in his research, this fellow is talking about a large number of individuals who chose to go hiking in the Canadian Arctic, specifically an area known as Baffin Island. If you look on a map, Baffin Island is a massive landmass equivalent to the eastern coast of the United States. Additionally, this is an incredibly sparsely populated area. Less than 10,000 people live here according to an old census. In other words, besides a few sparse towns here or there, it's an almost entirely desolate stretch of land. If you include the rest of the Canadian Arctic as well, then you're easily dealing with an Arctic landmass the size of the United States, an area that's almost completely uninhabited, with even explorers and wilderness enthusiasts staying clear of this region. With that said, it begs the question, why are these physicists, engineers, and other experts deciding to go to these areas, before eventually disappearing? It's interesting that these are experts in their fields, and not ordinary people. The type of people that could be of great value to a civilization. It's also interesting that these are folks with only Germanic ancestry. So, what if I told you that these cases might be suggesting something else together? What if these individuals are being quietly and covertly recruited, if you will, into this invisible Reich? That these high-level professionals get contacted through some means and eventually decide to join this invisible Reich that's been growing for decades, and that these escapades into the Arctic wilderness are convenient in that they can get picked up and transported with almost no one around that could possibly bear witness to what happened. A perfect cover story, if you will. Except for people like us, almost no one would connect the dots in such a way to conclude that this might suggest an inner Earth Third Reich is still growing and remains active to this date. I'd also like to show you something else. If you look at Baffin Island, it's an area with remarkable geography, mountains, valleys, and an almost alien-like appearance. As it turns out, the largest mountain on Baffin Island is an almost mystical-looking place, known simply as Mount Odin. Additionally, there's also a Mount 4, which at its peak, represents the largest vertical drop on Earth. If you were a member of this invisible Reich, wouldn't it make sense to build an outpost or conduct operations in a mostly unpopulated land, one that's also surrounded by mountains named after the Nordic gods? Considering the spiritual/occult origins on the haunebu sources, mainly that being of mediums like Maria Orsik and the Vril Society, I could definitely imagine Reich forces choosing to operate in the mountains named after Odin and Thor, places of potential magical protection. But again, that's just me and my own observations on the matter, and a personal expedition to these mountains seems like something worth doing. With that said, let me conclude this video with some more clips from another content creator on this topic, link included below.
That is my website, www.imperialgermans.com, and we are first going to look at some documents from the SSE4 secret archives. As you can see at the very beginning, you see the maps of the interior world of Agartha, or the Hollow Earth maps. These maps were actually found by the Russian Secret Service by the end of war in 1945 in Germany. We will now look at the schematics of the Andromeda device and the haunebu saucer spacecraft. Further below, we look at the schematics of the Andromeda device. It's 139 meters long and 30 meters in diameter. It says it in German, and it's from the SSE5 secret archives, and the date here is December 1944. Armed carrier and long-distance spaceship Andromeda device. Length 139 meters. Diameter 30 meters in the center computed. Propulsion 4 times Thule tachinators and 4 times Schumann levitators. Steering controls, magnetic field impulsors 4B. Velocity unknown. Its range is theoretically unlimited, depending on its supplies. The external armor unknown, probably thrice Victalen like in the haunebu 3. Its crew is 130 men, and its space capacity is 100%. The Andromeda device has multiple dinghies, one haunebu 2 or haunebu 1, and 2 Vril 1, Vril 2 fighters. So the Andromeda device is a long-range spaceship and has several dinghies. We will now look at some pictures of the Andromeda device. In the picture section of my website, you can see pictures of the Andromeda device in hovering mode. These pictures were taken from the Orion Conspiracy documentary, and I believe that the producer of this documentary actually published real photos in its documentary. In the first picture you can see an Andromeda device in hovering mode. Further below, you can see an Andromeda device taken from the vantage point of an airplane, and there are multiple pictures. Further below, you can see an Andromeda device in a snowy background, probably the South Pole, because the Imperial Germans have a base there, NATO base 221. Now we go to the citing sections of my website, and we quote Admiral Karl Dönitz. Citation from Admiral Karl Dönitz in 1943. The German U-boat fleet is proud to have built an earthen paradise, an unconquerable fortress for the Führer at the bottom of the world. Admiral Karl Dönitz in 1943. We'll start at the bottom. Here we can see a video of a test flight of a haunebu. Apparently this video was made in 1939 in the Third Reich. And we go to the next post. These are photographs of an RD Andromeda device and dinghies in Rhode Island, New York on July 4, 1967. Joseph Fourier, a chemist from the USA, who was walking around Cumberland, Rhode Island, New York, observed an Andromeda device. He took several photographs and watched a haunebu flying out of the mothership. The Andromeda device then turned 90 degrees upwards and shot upwards at high speed. Source OpenMinds.tv. Here you can clearly see an Imperial German Andromeda device. The images are hair sharp, and you can even see the dinghy or haunebu coming out of the mothership. The next article. This is a video recording of an Imperial German Andromeda device. This recording was made in New York in 1987. The next article. Two residents of Mineola, New York, have spotted a cigar-shaped UFO or Imperial German Andromeda device in New York. New York has a long history of cigar-shaped UFO sightings. The article states that there was virtually no cigar-shaped UFO before 1950. This correlates to the fact that the Imperial Germans did not have a large fleet in 1950. Nevertheless, the number of cigar-shaped UFO activities have increased dramatically from 2 sightings per decade, from 1950s to 1990s, to nearly a dozen sightings per year in the year 2009. Today, about 5% of all cylindrical UFO sightings are seen in the New York area. In 2014, around 258 cigar-shaped UFOs have been seen globally. Source: cigar-shaped UFO sightings in New York. This chart shows a dramatic increase of cigar-shaped UFO sightings in New York, from 3 sightings in 2000 to 8 sightings in 2011. We all know that New York is the financial powerhouse of the Zionist-controlled West. Even Adolf Hitler contemplated destroying New York using the German-made nuclear bomb. Hitler refused though to use the nuclear bomb because this would mean the end of all civilization. New York is under Zionist control. At the same time, Al-Bialik and the Montauk Project took place in New York, so-called experiments in time. We can only speculate on why so many Andromeda devices are seen in the vicinity of New York in these times. Next article or post. This is a video recording of an RD Andromeda device in the south of Sweden in 2007. In Sweden, many blonde women of childbearing age are missing. Here it is suspected that the Imperial Germans have kidnapped healthy young Swedish women to grow their own population. But if you ask me, if the Imperial Germans would ask me to go join them and work with them, I would go on a voluntary basis. Next post. Video recording of an Imperial German Andromeda device in Denton, UK, February 2013. Next post. Andromeda device sighted in Brazil in December 2013. Andromeda device or cylindrical UFO has been spotted in Brazil. Brazil is a hotbed of cigar-shaped UFOs and conventional UFO flight gyros like the haunebu 1, 2 and 3. There are many Imperial German bases in the jungles of Brazil. According to Jan Urhaulis's book, also known as Jan van Helsing, there are caves in Brazil that lead to the inner earth of Agartha. Source: cylindrical UFO spotted in Brazil.
¡Qué lindo! Hola, mis amigos me visitando.
The next sighting is from the Mars rover Curiosity on Mars. Date of the sighting is the 4th of May 2014. The Mars rover Curiosity took a whole series of pictures of flying cigar-like and haunebu-like devices on Mars. In our next video, we will see infrared video recordings of the sky where flying discs fly in V formation. This was typical among the German Air Force during World War II. Finally, we want to look at the presentation of Randolph Winters. He has published many pictures in his readings and videos of the Imperial Germans. The quality of the video is not so good, nevertheless you can see well the haunebu and real flying discs.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know these were on here. These are some of the Miami pictures, some of the ones that I didn't put on the tape. I'll kind of go through them here. Here's the kid in Miami. His name is Manny Escondon, is his real name. He's taking notes. Here these discs came in. His girlfriend took the pictures. These are flat-bottom discs. They're made on Earth. They're called Vril discs, V-R-I-L. They're manufactured down in Brazil. They also have a factory down by in New Schwabenland in Antarctica. There's another picture. There's a news copter came in. Look at the first three discs. When they see the copter, they start to turn invisible or put their shields up. And the first three crafts, they go out in a series, are just becoming invisible when he snapped the picture. It was taken with a Polaroid at a 30th of a second, so it caught it right in the minute of going out there. These discs were designed by German technology in the late 40s. First ones we know of that were tested out were probably around 47 or 48. They're called Vril levitation devices. As you can see, they actually fly quite well. Notice the nice V formation. Being typical earthbound Air Force pilots, they're still flying in formation. We understand this technology a little bit because intelligence has shot down some of their ships, learned how they're doing it. And when you hear rumors about how the Americans are building flying discs, what we're doing is playing catch up to the German technology that's been around since the 40s. Their technology has accelerated tremendously. They make two different types of levitation devices. That's what we're doing out in Area 51. We manufacture the devices in San Diego. They're put together by General Electric. We test them at Area 51. Here's the German disc parked down on the ground at a facility down in Brazil. Here's four guys standing next to it down there. There's a whole row of them. You couldn't count how many were down there. He had his Polaroid with him and grabbed a few short shots here. Over here's two guys here on a craft coming in. You can see the two guys standing here. And down here at the bottom, which I know isn't clear, is one of these old bell-shaped crafts. Many of you are probably not familiar, but there was a fellow named George Adamski back in 1962 who claimed to be having contacts with people from Venus. This was the craft he was taking pictures of. George's contacts were real, but he wasn't having contacts with anybody from Venus. The blonde-haired ladies that were inside the craft were actually from Brazil. That's where the crafts were flying out of. They've been making them down there since about 1947. They find it very convenient if they make contact or land somewhere to tell people they're extraterrestrials, and we're very open to it. If they tell them, hi, we're part of a German intelligence group from Brazil, people would freak out. I got my camcorder and I've got my micro lens on here, getting as close as I can to this picture. It's a very, very small Polaroid picture that's about that big, and it got wet in the rain. You left it in the windowsill. So I've ironed it and put it on paper so we didn't lose it. And I'm copying it with my macro. Here's the whole picture. Over here is one of the old bell-shaped discs. There's one in the air. Notice the platforms they're sitting on. There's a guy standing here. There's a guy over here just coming out of this disc. I'm trying to get real close to the bottom of it here so we can see what they're like. This is an area, if you look on a map, I've got a little videotape over there if you're interested in learning more about this information, called Space Cities. I've narrowed it down to about within a 200-mile range where this facility is at, what they're doing down there. Here's the guy standing there. The discs sit down on the platforms. Remember earlier I was telling you about how the condensers charge out the bottom? They have to charge the field up. If you get too close to the earth, the charge dissipates because it's grounded. These metal platforms, they sit them down on the platforms, then they can keep the ship charged up. And if they need to take back off right away, they can. They don't have to wait for the ship to charge back up. The platforms charge them up for them, so they can lift right back off. If they would set it down without the platform on the tripod legs, they got to go through the process again of charging the capacitors up, which takes 3 to 4 minutes. So if they're in a hurry to get away, they're in big trouble. These old bell-shaped discs actually have 3 Mercedes-Benz truck engines in them, driving the magnetic field. This was their first design that they made. This is the first ones that the Germans built. These craft here were under consideration, and they were working on them in the end of World War II. When you hear about Hitler's secret weapon at the World War II, if you go back and look at the newspapers, that's what he was talking about. They were in hopes they would get these things up and working, and they would still have a chance then to win the war. Fortunately for all of us, they did not, and we'd all be speaking German today. Interesting side effect, too, once they finally did get them up and working, they made lousy war weapons because the field around them prevents you from dropping bombs or anything out of them. It ignites the bombs. So it took them a while. They don't even have weapons on them for a while, and then they had to come up with other kinds of devices. This was the first pictures I saw from the kid in Florida of his German contacts, and to my knowledge, I still think they're his best and perhaps his only contacts. I think he probably had a couple of contacts from these people. They came, they took him for a ride, it looks like on 1 or 2 occasions, and then perhaps they never came back. So we found this situation on several people around the planet. So it's not an uncommon situation.
Randolph Winters has quite a few videos on YouTube about the Imperial Germans, the Hollow Earth, and about the aliens. In one of the videos he had apparently shown pictures of a dinosaur from the inner world of Agartha. Unfortunately, the pictures of the dinosaurs were not so sharp on the video, but you could clearly see the animal laying there. Unfortunately, the entire series of Randolph Winters was censored on YouTube. As well as in the infrared footage of the flying disc, and in the pictures of Randolph Winters, the flying disc flying V formation, which the German armed forces did often during World War II.
I hope you found this information insightful and informative. While some might not agree, I feel there is reason enough to suggest that there is indeed an invisible Reich of sorts growing in the shadows. What's more, that the little-known trend of German physicists, engineers, and professionals that disappear after making unusual trips by themselves to the Canadian Arctic, a desolate area surrounded by mountains named after Nordic gods, is actually proof that this invisible Reich, which others refer to as the Imperial Germans, is possibly recruiting and growing its strength behind the scenes. Lastly, as this one content creator just showed, the increasing cases of cigar-shaped UFO encounters, a vessel which looks very similar to the German Andromeda flying ship, further supports this theory of mine. If all this is true, then I believe this confirms that the surviving Third Reich presence following the war wasn't just a small enclave in Antarctica, living in some cavern cave complex with luminescent fauna which, at most, could handle a population of just a few thousand. Instead, I think it is indeed more likely that there is a shadow Reich of growing size, a civilization numbering maybe in the single-digit millions, with an industrial base strong enough to produce hundreds of these crafts, as well as coordinate recruitment and pick-up operations of highly valued technical personnel all over the world, with Baffin Island in Canada being one hotspot of activity in the North American continent. I say single-digit millions as a population size, as I think that's a reasonable quantity to have a moderate industry base, but still small enough that recruiting agents and assets from the regular world is still necessary and needed. That would also correspond with another video from Phil Productions, in which he had a 2-hour-long interview with a female medium, who also spoke of her inner Earth Reich of a similar population size. The only question I have right now is whether these inner Reich forces are only interested in only Germans, or if they recruit from other Aryan ethnicities as well. The last thing I want to mention is, if this Shadow Reich is operating behind the scenes, why haven't they revealed themselves? The first hint goes back to what we saw earlier, where that one researcher said these UFO pilots would rather pretend they're aliens from another world than admit they're descendants of surviving National Socialists. Most white people are still ignorant to the truth of World War II, and as such, there's not much point in this Shadow Reich revealing itself to the world if everyone will simply think they are the bad guys. Humanity needs to further awaken to the truth about the Jews and the National Socialists before any further revelations will be made on that topic. Additionally, I do not think the scope of power of this Shadow Reich to be strong enough to defeat the entire world united against it. What's more, in typical subversive fashion, I wouldn't be surprised if the Zog governments of the world already know this, and would rather co-opt this into a new psyop of aliens arriving from outer space. That would partially explain the increased publicity of the UFO topic recently, including the Congress UFO hearings, and receiving mainstream appeal. This could be another psyop in the making, with the Jew world order trying to reveal aliens as a means of further distracting and deceiving the world, rather than admitting that many of these UFO encounters are from the Imperial Germans. After all, revealing a potential alien menace could be the catalyst to unite the world in a true Jew world order one world government system, something which could be done much simpler than trying to go for the World War III route. With that said, I'll leave it at there for now. I've been gone for the past couple of months focusing on other things, but hopefully I'll find time to return to a more consistent uploading schedule soon. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video around. Best wishes and hail victory. Hyperborean Research signing off.